Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. So, today we're going to be talking about a Chinese air rifle. And we're not talking about a modern, normal Chinese air rifle these days. We're all pretty familiar with that. Everything's made in China. This is an older one. And forgive me, details on this are a little sketchy because I suspect the information is out there, but a lot of it isn't in English because nobody in the West really cares. At some point in the decades following World War II, Chinese manufacturers began to manufacture knockoffs of European spring piston air rifles for the domestic market in China. By and large, these were plain serviceable weapons. The metalwork is competently done, and they do lack in certain cosmetic areas. The stocks tend to be of cheap wood, inelegant and clunky, and the thick shellac finish in most cases appears to have been applied with a garden rake. But these were guns built to a price for their home market, and there wasn't a lot of money. So they couldn't be expensive. They couldn't deal with the niceties of finish. As I said, the metalwork is competently done and it's decent, but it's not highly finished because that costs money and would have added to the expense. Now in the 80s, spring piston air rifles became quite popular in America. Previously, we'd used mostly single spring piston guns, which were quite low powered, or multi-pump pneumatics. There are exceptions to this, of course, but for the most part, that's what most of us saw. And but spring piston guns from Europe became quite in vogue, and somebody in China realized, hey, these things are not actually firearms under American law and are not subject to the import restrictions. Let's send them over there and see if people will buy them. And they did, and we did. They're quite cheap. They were $35, $40, $50 when I first encountered them, which was probably in the late 80s or early 90s. And they aren't, slick, high velocity, super modern guns. But, they're basic and serviceable and rather ugly. And I've never owned one, and I have largely not thought about them, because when I thought of air guns, I thought of more interesting things. However, Pinto's Guns, the boss informed the other boss in no uncertain terms that all of these cheap air rifles that had accumulated in their back rooms over the last decades, I'm going to guess, needed to go. They're cluttering the place up and taking spots. So they brought out the big box O air guns. And I'll be doing a video about another gun from that horde. But this one I got for the princely sum of $35, and bought some Crossman pellets of various types and took it home and ran it through the chronograph to see what would happen. And what would happen was, with the two different types of Crossman Premier pellets, 7.4 grain and 7.9 grain, I got a pretty solid average of 650 feet per second, which for an inexpensive side-cocking spring piston gun is frankly about what I expected. Did not anticipate the accuracy, because at 10 yards, it was, from a rest, it was punching one-hole groups, which is pretty good. But the scope that it came with was a small diameter Simmons rimfire scope, and it was tragic. Fortunately, I had a nice old Weaver K360D languishing in my gun safe. So I went back to Pinto's and paid half the cost of the air rifle for a set of 1-inch scope rings and mounted it on the gun. And it works. And it was an enormous improvement. Then I got to looking at the stock. I could put up with a lot for cheap, but not that. It was just It was just too ugly and too clunky and too inelegant. So I busted out the sandpaper and went to work. And using my shop machines, belt grinders, my bandsaw, etc., I stripped it and pretty much had it looking much better very shortly. Then I thought, the length of pull's a little short, and we can do better. We can do something more interesting. Let's have a look at what that more interesting is. Yes, I am a sucker for a Mannlicher stock. I added a section of wood here, and since I was unable to match either the wood or the finish, I extended the length of pull by adding a matching piece of wood here and mimicking the cut lines. And quite satisfied with the result. The weapon balances beautifully. It looks quite good. And with the new scope, it's kind of a complete package. So I'm really pretty happy with this. Of course, if I were to charge my shop rate for the labor, I would have 10 times as much labor in it as the gun is worth, let alone what I paid for it. But that's not really the point, is it? So it is now an attractive, very nice air rifle that shoots very well indeed. Let's have a look at shooting it. Okay, operation of the rifle is pretty simple. You push forward on this little dingus here, which releases the lever. You pull the lever all the way to the rear, insert a pellet into the breech, which is trickier than I would prefer. Then you have to press this button here to release the ratchet that prevents the lever from slamming closed on you if you slip. And then the rifle is ready to go. There is a safety here that physically blocks the trigger from moving backwards, which is really all it needs to do. After that, of course, it's just a matter of aim and take the safety off and pull the trigger. And this gun is quite accurate. As I probably mentioned, it shoots one-hole groups from rest at 10 yards. And it's very pleasant to fire. It balances very nicely with this stock on it. There has to be a good way of carrying pellets that is handier, but I haven't found it in all these decades. And if you're stupid, the pellet falls out of the breech. There we go. It's really quite nice to fire. There's effectively no recoil impulse. Now, scopes on spring air guns have a bad habit of going bad because spring piston guns recoil in 2 directions in the course of firing, and this induces vibrations that are very bad for typical rifle scopes. This one seems to be holding up nicely. We'll see. And this gun is heavy enough that it really doesn't experience much in the way of those recoil forces and vibrations. It's a lot of fun. So let's see a little more detail. Now, don't ask what the scope rings are. I don't remember. He pulled them out. I looked at them and went, I recognize the brand. They look like good quality. They're this price. I'll buy them. And then I tossed the package. So I have no idea what brand they are. Seem to be good though. So here's the scope. These are made in the late 50s, early 60s by Weaver. And it's a fixed 3 power, I believe, which seems pretty good for this. I had no trouble getting it dialed in, getting it zeroed. And it has a much larger tube and much nicer visibility than the Simmons that came on the gun. So I'm very happy with that. Now, details of operation, which I went over out there, so this little sliding device disengages from the front of the cocking lever here, allowing you to open it. And then you pull this back, and there is a ratchet to prevent it from slamming closed on you if your hand slips, which is kind of a nice feature. This button releases the ratchet. Well, when you've got it fully cocked, this button releases the ratchet and allows you to relock the lever. Now, of course, I can't open it. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to dry fire them. But I will. So when you open it, let's see if I can get this on camera, there is this conical depression in the face of the pressure chamber, which fits over this cone-shaped extension of the breech. And you have to kind of reach in there with your fingers and fiddle the pellet into place, which is suboptimal, but it's kind of how they are. And then you fully cock the gun, close the lever, and you're ready to fire. Now the safety is pretty simple. It's a button with an extension that goes behind the trigger when the safety is engaged and does not allow you to fire it. Pressing the button moves that little extension enough that the trigger is now clear and you can pull it as we dry fire it once again, which we shouldn't. Now, I'm going to get a proper piece of material for the butt plate. Right now, it's just a piece of Kydex and leather screwed on rather crudely, but it'll do until I get some proper material for that. And as I mentioned, it's not a highly finished metalwork, but it's not bad. And the front sight is a hooded front sight made from 3 pieces of stamped sheet metal, one for each side, and one that forms the sight blade in the middle of the sight. And they're all just riveted together around the barrel. And that's fine, and it's actually not even particularly bad looking until you look closely and realize how cheaply it's made. Don't care. Now, the wood for the stock, for the additional forestock, and the extension on the butt is from a Douglas fir 4x6 that I had lying around. It's not premium wood, but it doesn't really have to be for this gun, does it? Anyway, overall, I like this gun very much now. It's attractive. It balances perfectly. It shoots very well. And yes, it's only 650 feet per second on a 177. I don't really care. I mean, all I'm going to do is shoot my airgun target in the backyard, maybe do some target shooting once in a while. And if vermin in the garden become an issue, I'll maybe deal with them with this. Now, one thing about this I will note, there's no model number, there's no serial number, there is bloody little in the way of identification of any kind. There are a series of Chinese characters here, and stamped under those, made in China. I've had this gun fully apart. Those are the only markings on the gun, period. So, anyway, fun project, produced a neat gun, and kept me out of the bingo halls for a weekend. I don't really ever go to bingo halls, people. It's just an expression. Not that I'm judging if you do. Yeah, I am. Anyway, nice project, fun gun, very happy with it. It will get a proper butt plate and further finishing, but really, it's done. Oh, and by the way, the button that releases the lever pokes out the bottom here. That's how far the stock used to stick out, and it was just kind of clubbed off at an angle at the end. You've seen the picture. This is much better. I did look into shortening this to be more appropriate, but the way it's made, that's not really possible, and I just didn't figure it was worth the effort of fabricating a replacement for it. Anyway, great old gun, given a new life, And who knows, maybe if my brother Joe and I are out mucking about and a bunny presents themselves, there could be trouble. Anyway, so I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.